Why, hello there. I'm John Harvey, your host for Exam 1 Handing Back 2020, COVID style. Okay. Are y'all as exhausted as I am? This online grading stuff takes forever. I know this is just the day after you took the test, but man, I have not stopped. But I am done. I have uploaded all the exams that are graded along with your grades to the online thing already. I haven't hit publish yet. And so I will do that as soon as I get this done and processed, because I want you to receive all of this at once. I also didn't want to take up time in class tomorrow going over the test. Plus, I don't know, it's just kind of nice to have a permanent record where you could go back and look at this again, or if you know, I don't know, I just don't want to take up the time. I'd rather have a nice period of time when I know I can cover everything I want to cover, and I'm not worried about making sure I started the Zoom and stuff like that. So here we go. So this is common to both exams. So I'm going to tack this on to the beginning of both videos where I go over the test itself. And let me tell you here. Let's see. Actually, maybe I should pull the laptop, well, over here. Well, I can just tell you. All right. So here's how it works. When you upload the test, it assigns you a number. Let's see, in International Monetary, there are 31 students. It assigns you a number randomly from 1 to 31. And not 1 because you were first, because then that would also kind of give away whose test was whose. So it just randomizes it. So what I do then is, so all I know is user 1, user 2, user 3. I then download each one of those. So I had 29 to download for International Monetary, 20 for containing perspectives, and then I renamed them because it originally had the name you guys put on it. Every once in a while, somebody put their name within the title within their file name, and that's okay. I mean, you were making sure it didn't get lost, but I took it off. What I did was, if you were anonymous user number 5, I just renamed the file user 5. And so once I had all those files collected for each class, then I would get out my key, and of course I'm not going to go into great detail in this part of the video, but I would get out my key, look over the key, and before I start grading, I always like to read over several exams and get an idea of how everybody did on it, because I've got my idea how I'm going to grade it, but then I end up adjusting things, all right, as I find it. Well, I don't want to get halfway through the class and then realize I shouldn't have done it that way, so I like to read a whole bunch of them first. I actually do sometimes still end up with a problem if I've got to go back through and say, you know what, I shouldn't have been grading it that way. In fact, I believe in containing perspectives. I went back through ones I'd already graded and thought, I want to adjust that a little bit. Let's see, what else in general then that applies to both exams? Okay, so let me see here if you can. I'll double check my monitor and make sure you can see this properly. All right, so let's not forget how the grade's going to work out here. We got 9 times 5 for 45 for quizzes. All right, can you read that? Yeah, you can. 9 times 5 for 45 for quizzes. Then, let's see, 5 times 1 for 5 for reflections. Some people are not doing the reflections. For crying out loud, it's a free point, and you can put in there, screw you, Harvey, and you get the free point. Anyway, and it's always the people who need the free points who aren't getting the free points. All right, and then we've got, let's see, 3 exams. Well, 2 of them are 15 points, and then the final is 20 points. I believe this is right. We'll find out in just a second, won't we? Yeah, that's right. 30, 20, so that's going to be exam 1, exam 2, exam 3. And adds up to 100. Yay! So, let me remind you something I assume I said in one of the initial videos. I can't even remember anymore because this entire 9 months is a blur. And that is that my thinking was, hey, let's circle these in order of difficulty, all right? That's free. I don't know how well you can see that. I may zoom this in a little bit just to make sure. Okay. You're probably thinking, yeah, that was a real little bit, Harvey. Come on. 5 absolutely free points. I'm going to circle that in green. Then, in a lovely horned frog purple, 45 points that I'm figuring relatively easier points. All right, you've got if you've sat down and written out your what do you call it, outline, and you've got your book and so forth there. Now, if you decided not to read the chapter until you took the quiz, then it's not an easy 45 points. But and I don't want to say easy. This is incredibly easy. I'm figuring you can the average student's going to get maybe an 80 in that right there. Okay. We started off a little slow in containing perspectives, but people are picking up on it now. Then these down here are meant to be the more challenging parts. As I said to you before the exam came up, I said, this is just testing to make sure you read stuff, make sure you read through the chapter, right? This is to make sure you understood it. So I always intended this to be somewhat more difficult, all right? That this is somewhat more challenging. I preface all this with that because on average the grades were relatively low. I raised them in both classes so that they are now equal to or higher than the average grade on the regular exam 1 that took place this time last year, on the regular exam 1. And bear in mind, in a normal semester, the way I do this is I have the exam broken up into parts that are just word for word off the study questions and parts that are hellish, all right, which is a bit more like these things here. These are the hellish parts. I therefore raised the grades on exam 1 to an average that was really relatively high, given that they had questions that they should have gotten easily. In other words, I'm sort of combining, on the regular semester, I sort of combine the hey, did you read it, and hey, did you understand it on a single exam. And I pulled these up to the average of an exam that actually included 80% of which was, hey, did you read it? All right, so hopefully that'll help out a lot. Yeah, so I think I need to go into the details on each one of those now. But again, I remind you this, I still have no idea how anybody did. I still don't know because all I know is this. I've written down over here for International Monetary, those are the people who took the exam as number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4. That's all I know. Again, I'm not going to post those until I get done with this. I mean, by the time you see this, they will be posted, but nevertheless. And I did see a couple of names because, as I said, people had, when I was putting the grades in before I could see the names, sometimes somebody had renamed their file with their, like, Harvey, exam 1. So, okay, well, I know this is Harvey's. I didn't know it was Harvey's when I graded it. But I know it's Harvey's now that I am uploading the graded document or the graded exam and putting the grade in. I know it's Harvey's now. And I know already there's going to be some people that are used to doing better that didn't do as well. So we'll see how this all works out. Also, let me remind you of my promise made during the summer. At the end of the semester, if the grades are out of line in a negative way, with how the grades usually are in this class, I'm moving them up, all right? Because any errors that I make in this new course design will be in your favor and not against you, all right? Now, that still means it's about 1 out of every 5 people in a normal semester for me, and that doesn't count the people who drop, of course. The people who drop generally would have done even better. But out of that, but I will make sure that this is not more challenging than it was, at final count than a regular semester. And wait a minute, that reminded me of something else. What was it? Or am I ready to cut this off and then start doing the individual exams? Okay, next quiz is, the quizzes are going to be on Thursday for the next 3 for the next 3 quizzes, they'll be on Thursdays, but I'll show you that in class. Let's see, is that everything? Yeah, I think so. All right, so that's the next door neighbor's dog growling. I thought perhaps my stomach was growling because I am very hungry right now, but it's the dog. So now I'm going to stop this and I'm going to merge this into the other 2 class files, the videos. Now I'm going to go over each class individually. Thank you. I'm now going to make the exact same joke I made so often during the videos I made over the summer for the lectures. It seems like just moments ago that I was speaking to you about the general background on both exams, because it was. All right, so I'm going to go in order. Let's do contending perspectives first. All right, and let me find my eraser. There it is. Let's see, and I guess let's do the grades first, okay? Let's do the overall grades first. And then I will go through the exam. Yeah, that's how I usually do it in class, so let's do it that way right here. All right, so I think I'll give us 3 columns here. Let's see, we'll do this. Fall 2020, Fall 2019, Fall 2020 plus. All right, yeah, you can barely see that. Excellent. Not excellent that you can barely see it, but excellent that you can see it at all. What class is this? Wrong class. Let's see what we had on first count. Okay, so when I first went through and graded 2, including a perfect score, and then the class average was a 64. All right, so I was delighted with the perfect score, of course, and the other one was dang near perfect. But I was concerned that the overall average was 64 in an upper level econ class, and so I went back to look, well, what was the average on the first exam in fall 2019? And unfortunately, it was 66, all right? So they really didn't do a hell of a lot better. And it's as you can imagine, it's usually the first exam that people do the worst. All right, so people did improve after that. Actually, let me have a look here in a minute at what the final course grades were there, and I'll give you an idea here. Let me unplug my computer back here and take out the 1,000 cables that are stuck into it. And finally, the Ethernet cable. All right, let me tell you what the final course grades were in 2019. Let me jot down here 52257. All right, so those were the actual grades in fall 2019. But what were the final course grades, John Harvey? Well, I don't know, John. Let's find out. I'm getting a little punchy right now. I was up very late getting all this done. I don't like having exams ungraded. I want those suckers done as fast as I can. A, because I got other crap to do. And B, because when I was a student, I wanted it graded as soon as possible. I wanted to get my test back. So let's see here. It's warming up right now. So wake up, wake up. It still just says John Harvey Professor right now. Hang on. Any other information I could add to that? Let's see while I'm looking at this. Never mind. All right, let me find here. What were the grades in class, final grades, last year? And first day of class lecture, first day of class, yeah, that's it. It's installing an update with Discord, which is a gaming communication device. My daughter and I play on this. Quit. I'm going to turn that off. And here we go. Apparently it had shut down. Now it's rebooting everything. Got it. Fall 2019. These are the final grades in the course. 74215. People dropped. Cowards. But otherwise, you can see they increased the number of A's and B's, C stayed the same, and the number of D's and F's went down. Not as much as you would like on the F area, but anyway, so again, my point being that generally speaking, it's the first exam where people do the worst because they're not quite sure how everything is going to work, despite my reassurances. Now, here's what I decided to do. I went through, and of course, at this point, while I'm making this video, I still don't know who scored what in class because I still haven't published them, and the computer won't tell me until I hit publish who got what grades. So I did, however, plug all the grades in on my spreadsheet and play around with them to see if I could get something more similar to this. And I decided, as you'll be delighted to hear, that this was actually a little low right here. Given the typical semester. So what I did was I changed all the final course grade, final exam grades to make the average on the test a 72, all right, instead of a 64. So I added 8%. Or more specifically, I added 1.25 points out of 15. So when you open up your file and you look at the exam I graded, if the exam I graded had a 10, I actually put down, and you'll see this too when you open it up, I actually put down 11.25 for your grade. Right? So what I put in for your grade was plus 1.25 over what's on the exam. And how did that break down the A's and B's and C's now? Once I did that, 4, 5, 2, 4, 5. What about the person that got a perfect score? Did they end up with a 16.25? Yes, they did. They're going to be very happy. All right, so, and one other person got a better than perfect. The other A also was so close. They were within 1.25, so they ended up with a higher than perfect score. So now you can see here, with this adjustment here, we went up by 2, up by 3, down by 3, up by 1, and down by 3, right? So, and something much more similar to what we had in fall of 2019. In fact, superior to that, not surprisingly, since I pushed it up a little bit higher. Okay, so that's what I ended up doing. Again, as I said in the introductory part of this, I'm expecting the grades to be somewhat lower on the exams than on the quizzes, so you really need to make sure you work hard on the quizzes. And make sure you do the frickin' reflections, all right? But otherwise, that's how I adjust the grade. Now let me go over the test itself. I'll tell you one thing that's a big advantage to you in me doing all of this online is that what I normally do in a regular semester, everyone takes their exam on a blue book, and I grade the blue book and hand it back. Right. I turn the front page over. That's how I keep the anonymous part of it. But something I don't do in the regular semester is write many comments on each question. Because I figure, hey, I'm going to go over it in class. I'd rather have it graded quickly. I'm just going to go down here and say -2. What, are you stupid? You know, stuff like that. And then in class, I'll go over, you know, how much everything was worth and so forth. And then if people have questions, they can ask me about it afterwards. But most people's questions are answered when I go over it in class. When I'm grading it online like this, and this is one of the reasons why it ends up being so much more labor intensive, is that I do go ahead and put the comments in, all right? So you've got lots of comments on your exam for where you got things wrong, and some comments where you got things right. All right, so you had 3 questions. First one was, here, I'll hold it up here and then I'll read it to you. Focus, focus, focus. Recall the argument that Marx uses to show that capitalism is exploitative. While it might not be cogent, it's certainly valid. Now look through the list of premises below and consider their effect on his argument. In particular, decide whether or not it would make it invalid. Note that some of them would obviously replace an existing premise in his argument, while others would represent an additional premise. Your task, Start by listing out his original premises and conclusion. Feel free to cut and paste from your notes. Then give me a sentence or two on each of the 6 below, telling me if it would replace an existing premise. Oh, and actually, I forgot, I edited a bit the day of the exam. I added a little line in there. You might want to write out the original one right here. You didn't have to, it wasn't part of the points, but you might want to write out the original one right here. And hey, let's do that real quick, all right? Premise 1, premise 2, premise 3, premise 4, therefore. All right, don't tell me. All value is created by labor or something like that. All value created by labor, workers' labor, capitalists own. Own means production is what we usually write, but I'm just going to stop right there. Only those who create value deserve income, and capitalists earn income in the form of profits. Therefore, the capitalists are retaining some of the value created and earned by workers. Those bastards. All right. So then I gave you, let's see, 5, 6, each worth a point. And the way I graded this, okay, so in each one you were supposed to say, does it replace a premise or does it add a new premise? That's worth a quarter of a point, all right? Does it replace or add quarter of a point? Then I want your analysis of whether or not this invalidates the argument. And honestly, I wrote down what I thought, but I mean, I can recall right now answers that I thought, I don't exactly agree with that, but that's pretty good. Full credit. All right. So I'm really looking for, do you understand these concepts? Now, there's things that you can say that make no sense, of course, too. But for the most part, I'm really leaning towards, do you understand what the heck's going on? And let me tell you this first, because here was a problem. These are the premises of the argument up here. All right, those are the premises. And what color do I want to use for this? And that's the conclusion. Now, you may recall that one of the items listed on my study guide for exam 1 was the whole validity cogency thing. You need to make sure you understand that. In fact, let me look that up real quick while I'm talking. Therefore, as sort of a prerequisite for figuring this one out, see, COVID fall, 20, how to study. Control H, exam 1, material. Here you go. Validity and cogency, all right? And Marx's labor theory of exploitation, you see that down the bottom. I'm sorry, theory of labor exploitation. So those are the two items I was drawing on from the list here. And unfortunately, I think there were some people that just didn't understand the validity and cogency thing to start with. An argument is valid or invalid, all right? An argument is. Premises are not valid or invalid. Premises are warranted or not. But validity is the quality of an argument. And what is that quality? Is the conclusion supported by the premises? All TCU students own a hamster. Pat's a TCU student. Therefore, Pat owns a hamster. Is that valid? Absolutely. Is it cogent? Well, that depends on whether or not the premises are warranted, all right? So this question is not asking whether you think the premises are warranted. That is a very difficult thing to answer in a limited amount of time. It's also, as I said earlier, somewhat subjective. Is it warranted, all right? I'm only asking, if you add this new premise, is the conclusion still supported, all right? So you're checking the validity of the argument. In particular, decide whether or not it would make it invalid. All right. So with adding this new premise, would it make it invalid? So there was a problem there on a number of exams that people weren't checking the validity. Sometimes I had people saying, "Well, here let's take this here. Labor and risk taking create value." That was the first new premise. Well, I don't think that's valid. That wasn't what the question asked. The question asked, in inserting this, because premises aren't valid or invalid. That's not even a thing. Premises aren't valid or invalid. Arguments are valid or invalid. And so when you insert the new premise, is this argument, this new argument with the new premise, which either replaced one of these or became an extra one, a premise 5, is the new argument still supportive of the conclusion? That's all you're looking for, all right? Now, not to say that that's easy, but that's all you're looking for. Whether or not you agree with the premises is not part of the question. And premises are not valid. You weren't setting out to decide whether or not you believed that the premises were valid, because premises aren't valid. Arguments are valid, all right? And it says here, consider the effect on his argument. In particular, decide whether or not it would make it invalid. So if you didn't really understand cogency and validity to start with, this was going to be a difficult question to answer, all right? But that's why I put it on the list, is that this is something that I commonly ask at this point of the semester, is something like this. All right, so there's the first thing. So now bearing that in mind, the very first one is labor and risk-taking create value, all right? Labor and risk-taking create value. And so this is going to replace this one here. All right, that you say, well, no, that said all value is created by labor, so we can't have all value is created by labor and, oh, by the way, also risk-taking. No. Then we just replace the first one. All value is created by labor and risk-taking. And does this invalidate the argument? All right, if we replace this with value is created by labor and risk-taking, then it is no longer true that all value was created by workers. That capitalists don't labor, all right? But if capitalists undertake risks by, starting certain companies and so forth, or buying certain companies, well, now they've earned something. Now they have created value. And only those who create value deserve income, and so capitalists do deserve something, all right? So if we put in labor and risk-taking create value, then now the argument is invalidated, because it is no longer clear that capitalists don't deserve something and that what they're taking might be perfectly fine. Let's see. So that it replaces an argument was worth 0.25, and then your discussion of whether it invalidates the argument or not was worth 0.75. Now, how much I took off, if you didn't get it quite right, varied, of course, anywhere from 0.75 to, 0.25, right? And that was just a case-by-case basis. But remember, as I mentioned in the introductory part of this video, I always looked through a bunch of tests before I started grading. I wanted to make sure I had some feeling for how people were doing on this, because then that's going to say to me, what do I take 0.75 off for? What do I take 0.25 off for? And so forth. And that's what I did. Let's see. And you should have specific comments on your exam that I don't normally do in this class. All right. There exists a tax that takes a percentage of profits from capitalists and gives it to workers. Well, that's not covered anywhere. That's a premise 5, all right? So there's nothing that covers a similar topic. Somebody in class, boy, did it. And of course, again, I don't know who it is. To this point, I still haven't uploaded the grades or hit the word publish on the screen. I don't know who did what. But somebody did a really nice job of going through and saying, well, let's see. Was this already covered or not? No, it wasn't. So this must be a new one. Yes. So that'll be a premise 5, all right? Now, does it invalidate the argument if taxes take some money away from the capitalists and give it to the workers, does it invalidate the argument? Well, no, not really. Think of it this way. Let's say that you can earn money by having a job or by robbing people, all right? And let's say that at the end of the day, we take money from the robbers and give it back to the people they stole it from. Robbery is still immoral. Robbery is still it is still true that robbers are taking some of the value created by workers, all right? Just because we gave it back doesn't mean that this isn't true anymore. We've lessened the impact of it, and there were some very nice answers on that too, saying that, what it does do is it makes it less of an issue. Okay, that makes sense. But the underlying problem is that they deserve how much? 0. So only in fact, this was my sample exam question, right? Only a 100% tax would actually fix this. But a number of very good answers on that one. Let's see. Some individuals are both workers and capitalists. This is actually a fifth premise. This does not replace workers, labor, and capitalists own. I could say that quarterbacks try to throw touchdown passes and, let's see, and cleanup hitters try to hit home runs. But you can be a quarterback and a cleanup hitter. Not very often. Let's see, the only example I can think of is no one. Well, actually in college or high school, it would not be uncommon at all for someone to be playing both sports. And so I can define a football player one way and a baseball player another way, and yet nevertheless say, oh, there can be people who are football players and baseball players though. Right? So that's a fifth premise. Does it invalidate the argument? Absolutely not. Because the money you earn as a capitalist is still unfair. I shouldn't even use the word earn there, should I? The money that you get as a capitalist is still unjust. Let me get back to the robber thing. You can make money working a job or robbing people. And some people both work a job and rob people. That's certainly possible. But it does make it more complicated to tease out how much income was from where. I need to see your books, right? And your paycheck. But otherwise, it's still nevertheless true that the money taken by robbers is immoral and the money earned by workers is moral, is what we're getting at here. So that would be on C. Some individuals are both workers and capitalists. That's a premise 5. That's worth a quarter of a point. And then, no, it doesn't invalidate the argument. It makes it a little bit more complicated, which is what some people said. I can remember one person in particular saying that it blurs the line. You're right, it does. But it doesn't change this. If we added premise 5 in there, we could still absolutely say this is completely supported by everything that was up here. Because premise 5 had no real impact on it. It just meant that in the real world, when we try to figure out which part was which, it's going to be a little bit more complicated. All right, D, value is subjective. And I put a parentheses there to make sure you understood what I meant by that. A function of the culture of the society in question. Well, this is replacing value again. What is value? And what creates value? Is it created by labor and risk-taking, or is it just a subjective concept that, we happen to think that, little tiny pieces of rock that are silvery diamonds are very valuable, regardless of how much labor is involved in getting them out of the ground and so forth. We happen to think, and in our culture, we believe that people who can throw small spheroids, how far is it from home plate to the pitcher's mound? 80-something feet? I can't remember now. But would it be 70-something? People who can do that with great velocity and control, we should pay them lots and lots of money, in fact, millions of dollars, and be wealthier than everybody else. Well, this is let's see. How far is it from the pitcher's mound to home plate? 60 feet, 6 inches. All right. And so that replaces that one. Now, that creates a problem. That creates a big problem. Because now our society could believe that owning capital is valuable, that it creates value, all right, that the ownership of capital is valuable. So now it's not necessarily true anymore that the capitalists are keeping something that was earned by the workers. No, if our society decides that ownership of capital is something that creates value, then the capitalists deserve something. It might not be exactly as much as they're getting, or but nevertheless. All right, E was very interesting. I enjoyed reading the answers on this, other than the fact that I was exhausted. Although actually I started with your class, so it wasn't as bad. By the time I got to international monetary, man, I was worn out. Usually I go to bed 10, 11. Why? Because I want to? No, I'm going to stay up all night, leveling up my character in Fallout 76. But I got to get up, right? So I stayed up till like 12:30 last night, which was very unusual for me, getting everything graded. I did let myself sleep till 8:30. That was very nice. Let's see. Oh yeah, production processes are entirely automated. Okay, now. First of all, it's a fifth premise. There's nothing about this anywhere else, right? There's nothing about that anywhere else. So there's a quarter of a point. It's a fifth premise. Now, people went a couple of different directions with this. The way I've always looked at it is this. Okay, so the argument that Marx is making is irrelevant, but it's still supported by the premises, if you see what I'm saying. That I add in, oh, by the way, this stuff doesn't actually happen. Okay, but, I mean, this is a question of logic. If logically we include this, and this, we got that covered, all right? That's supported. If we then point out, oh, but in our society, we don't do that. Oh, okay, so the theory is irrelevant, but it's not invalidated. For example, let's say we went through here and concluded that slavery was immoral. All right, we conclude that slavery is immoral, and then we included the premise 5, there are no slaves. Okay, well then the theory is irrelevant in our culture, but the argument is still valid. All right, so that's the direction I usually go, and some people said that, well, it's still supported. It just turns out that it's not really important anymore. A direction, and by the way, I've asked this question before. I've asked this question on as the hell portion of exams and regular semesters, and I don't think anybody had ever said this before, but a number of people did this time around. They said, well, now we're not creating any value. Because if there is no labor, and we can actually get a little bit deeper into Marx here and say that, well, but machines were created by labor in the first place, but I didn't want to push anybody on that. If you said it, I'd have given you credit for it, but I wasn't going to count it against you that you didn't know that. So we're not creating any value anymore, so really this argument doesn't hold up anymore, because how do we talk about it? It's still a little bit in the sense of it's irrelevant, but I liked the idea that these people said, we're not even creating value anymore in this culture. By this system where there are no laborers, we're not creating any value, so how do we even determine this? Well, they're retaining some of the value that wasn't created? How can that be? I was like, you know what? I like that. And as I said earlier, there were times when I read an answer and I thought, that's not quite right. But man, you worked hard on this. You were going in directions that made a lot of sense. I don't think you quite made it, but this was superior to other people's answers in class, so I'm going to give you full credit for this. That doesn't happen a lot, but just to assure you that I don't think I ever looked at my key, other than the fact that it's 0.25 for this and 0.75 for that. I wrote it out so I could be thinking about it, but then I checked to see what you had to say. Let's see. Last one, F. Isn't that right? Yeah. If you earned income, that's evidence that you deserved it. All right, well, that's going to replace only those who create value deserve income. Now it's anyone who earns income deserves income. If you earned it, you must have deserved it, all right? So we've replaced number 3. There's a quarter of a point. And now, of course, the whole thing falls apart. Now, we don't have a valid argument anymore, because if the capitalists earned it, well, then they deserved it. So once you pull out premise 3 and replace it like that, then the argument is no longer valid. Okay, that was exciting. It was actually. I enjoyed that one. Number 2 is also one I've asked in the past. Oh, here, let me show you. I think this is very interesting to think about as an economics major. Research suggests that firms don't really care that much about interest rates, which is absolutely true, by the way. If it is true that changes in the interest rate have no effect on investment, that's not true. That's an exaggeration, but just to make the argument here. Then what happens to the neoclassical view of how S equals I? Think in particular about this. What happens if, after starting at full employment and S equals I falls? Your task. Explain the sequence of events as you did in the original analysis, but now with this new twist. All right, so a lot of people didn't explain this sequence of events like we did in the first place. I'm like, well, it even says in bolded, your task. They just kind of made a little comment. Yeah, I don't think that'll work. No. Explain the sequence of events. But now with a new twist. At the end of the sequence, is it still true that S equals I? What of note occurred? And then I even thought, hey, if you want to, I'm hoping you're actually taking notes on all these things that I talk about in the YouTube videos. I also did this one in a Zoom lecture or a live lecture, probably a Zoom lecture, because I think at that point we decided that classroom sucked. If you've been writing it all down, you could have just copied it and pasted it in, and then gone through and changed whatever you needed to change for the new argument. There were a couple of people that just block copied in the old one and just left it. I was like, but you didn't change anything. What the hell? All right. Now, here's the answer. And, okay, so we start off with, if you want to write the premises out, you can. You didn't have to, because I wanted the sequence of events. I wanted the part, let's see, do I have my notes laying around here somewhere? I wanted the part where, pardon me, I believe they're right here, where it said, yep, here they are. Oh, it's already open to that page. How about that? Analysis. Now let's say the firms decide to lower investment. That's the part that's important here. What happens after that? Okay, so you have firms lower investment. So investment's now less than savings. Just like in the original one, this creates a problem for the financial sector. And saying that was worth somewhere in the range of 1 point. All right, that's how I worked it out. So if you talk about that part, and I mean it's going to be successfully so, you may have done so, but only got 0.75 of the 1 point. But generally speaking, people got all 1 point for that one. It's going to cause a problem for the financial sector, and they will therefore lower interest rates. This is worth 5 points altogether, this question, right? Yeah. They will therefore lower interest rates. I then have this diagram written out here. Yeah. The only difference being, I've got a big red X over this. That part doesn't happen this time. The investment doesn't recover. But the savings fall? Well, yeah. You're going to lower the interest rate, then in this model, savings is going to fall. And how long will banks lower the interest rate? Remember, we said this before, over and over, when we were doing both of them. How long will they lower it? At what point will they stop lowering it? When those two are equal. So yeah, they still come to equality. They still end up being S equals I. The only difference is one, two, three, four, five. Yeah, okay. The only difference is that, oh, and there's also no recession. There's another plus one. One, two, three, four. Yeah, that's right. And then we got, oops, wrong direction. Yeah, you can see that. All right. So it falls, and these two things here stay exactly like they did in the original question, right? And so if you just gave me the original question and that was it, and you didn't try then I gave you 2 out of 5. So you got a -3, all right, for not actually answering the question and just giving me back, what was said in the first one. Then to earn the rest of the 3 points, hey, it turns out that you still end up at S equals I, which therefore means no recession because the spending has jumped back up. Consumption has to bear the entire burden of the fall in investment. There is no recovery of investment. If investment fell by 50, consumption's got to go up by 50. If investment fell by 10, consumption's got to go up by 10. There's not going to be a fall by 10, oh, but it went back up by 2. So now consumption only has to rise by 8, by the net fall in investment. Well, there is no net fall here. There's no point. The concept is irrelevant because it just fell and stopped, right? So this has to make up the entire difference. And then, so it means it's going to have to rise more, all right? It's going to have to rise more, and R is going to have to fall more than it would have in the other scenario. But we still get the same result. And that's really interesting, which means that this argument didn't depend on that premise. This argument doesn't depend, I always set it back down again over here. This argument does not depend on I is negatively related to the interest rate. It doesn't have to be. Nor, by the way, does S have to be positively related to the interest rate. But one of them has to be. One of those two has to be true. All right, either the adjustment is on both sides, or entirely on this side, or entirely on this side. But if we cut both of them, if we say that neither savings nor investment is driven by the interest rate, then it doesn't work anymore. Okay, so there was that one. On the last one, let's see. Agree or disagree with this statement? Hint, agree with it. The concept of productivity plays a complicated role in Marx's analysis, being both a positive and negative force at various times. Please explain, offering examples of the role of productivity in Marx. By this time, there were some people not doing very well. All right, so I eased up on this one. It's worth 4. I only took off 4 if you left it blank. All right. Otherwise, a bad error where you tried was only worth -2. Right? And furthermore, there were a couple of people in class, and I kind of reserved this for really good answers. There were a couple people in class got a couple of bonus points. All right. It's like, well, you know what? You did a hell of a job on this one. And I hate to just give you -0 on this when I've reduced the weight of this one by going from -4 to -2 being what you would get if you had a really bad answer. So I gave, I don't know, I think one person +2 and a couple of people maybe a +1 or something like that. Not a lot, but there were a couple that were really good. And here was a typical problem on this one. And not really understanding the word productivity. Imagining that this meant just any production process. Productivity means I go to work at a factory. No. Productivity is output per person. All right? Productivity is output per person, and that is critical. Or output per labor hour works just as well. Sorry. And this is always one where I give a lot of leeway, because I have asked this one before too. Give you a lot of leeway to see what direction you go in. And I tend to grade this one more on a class average than on the previous one, on number 2. There was right and there was wrong. Okay, there really wasn't a lot of room for interpretation there. It was a formal model. I changed something, then you had the results. But on this one, this is what I've got for negatives. Well, it causes falling profits, all right, which causes crises and recessions. And also, productivity arises from the division of labor, which causes alienation and people to feel like crap. But then also, it eventually destroys the division of labor, which is really interesting. When productivity is high enough and we don't have to depend on doing the same job every day anymore because society, what is it Marx said, society regulates the general production or something like that, then actually at some point the productivity actually goes from a negative because it's alienation to a positive because it destroyed capitalism, because it destroyed socialism, and because it brought us to a society where we can do what we want, have much more freedom of choice, we can obviously have more goods and services and so forth. And so really on that one, if you gave it an honest effort, you get at least a -0. There were some where I was like, that's not what productivity means. So I'm having a tough time getting anything out of your answer. But the worst you would get if you hadn't left it blank was -2. So that's it. Now, sometimes people ask, will I post the key? I will not. I mean, we've got it here. You could make one up from this. But as I've mentioned here, I've asked all these questions before. These kind of questions are really hard to come up with. When I write an exam, these take hours, right? And I've only got a limited number of them. I try to come up with a new one every semester, and sometimes I'm successful and sometimes I'm not, but I just don't have that many. So if we ended up with all of these on a web page somewhere, I'd have to change everything about the way the class works. I don't know what I would do. So you've got enough information right now to make a key if you wanted to, but what I'm trying to prevent is the lazy people from intervening here, pulling off the key, saving it, uploading it somewhere. I don't want that, so I can't post this. Let's see. So I think that's it. So I'm now going to go eat lunch, and then I'll come back and do International Monetary. But remember, we're in a new classroom. What's that number again? Let me find it here. So if you want to come to class on Thursday, please feel free to do so. We can accept, I have enough room now for everybody who is signed up as on campus and not online. And so there's no more A-B stuff. And let me see, I just had to email somebody about where, 1309, right? Neely 1309, all right? So that means it could be like anywhere on half of the campus, right? Because everything over there is called Neely. But it's on the bottom floor, and it's like in the easternmost part, so closer to Dallas, easternmost part of campus. So it's one of those rooms there that the window looks out over that street that's kind of half closed right now, and there's some parking lots next to it. But it's not hard to find. So 1309, and it's not bad. I'm looking forward to this. Anyway, well, let me say this too. So again, as I said in the introductory part of this video, I'm going to keep tabs on the grades all semester long. This is very experimental for me, doing it this way. And I will keep my promise that at the end of the semester, and I'm going to try to adjust during the semester, but I don't quite know yet where to push and where to pull, right? But I'm going to make sure that the grades are at least no different than usual. If they're better, leave it alone. If they are worse, then I'm going to raise them. And if they're exactly the same, I'm going to leave them exactly the same. I'm going to go have lunch. Goodbye.